Welcome back, welcome back. We're in Module 9, Chapter 11's PowerPoint. We did skip a couple chapters there because that's what public speaking course is for. So I didn't want to reiterate that same information that we give in the public speaking class. But we are on Unit 11, Informative and Persuasive Speaking. Now this is a little bit of some of the things we've learned also in the public speaking class. So those that have taken that class with me, you're going to get a little bit of a rehash in this, but it's important for this course for me to at least cover those things just in case the student didn't take that course. So when we think about informative speeches, they're not super exciting. They're relaying information, right? We do this in the workplace a lot. Reports, we talk about upcoming product launches, things like that, right? So they're a real necessity in our lives. It's our most common speech that we will deliver throughout our life. Again, reports, lectures, training seminars, demonstrations, those are forms of informative speaking. It means you're likely to give and or listen to informative speeches in a variety of contexts throughout your course of your life. Some organizations, like consulting firms, I work for one of those, and of course, teach, and have been a trainer before. Those speeches are more about conveying information, not so much about entertainment always, right? Do try to create some entertainment value, but the reality is it's a course, or if it's a training in a workplace, you try to make it fun, but the reality is, again, it's getting information across. College alumni have reported that out of the different speech skills, informative speaking is the most important. Since your exposure to informative speaking is inevitable, why not learn how to be a better producer and consumer of informative messages, right? And that's what this section's about. So when we create an informative speech, the goal of an informative speaking is to teach an audience something using an objective, factual information base. Informative speaking is kind of a newcomer to the world of public speaking, at least in theory and instruction. But it really began thousands of years ago with the ancient Greeks. But we haven't really studied it too much since, honestly, we started studying it in the 1950s, pretty much. Ancient philosophers and statesmen like Aristotle, Cicero, and Quintilian conceived of public speaking as rhetoric, which we talked about earlier in this book. And rhetoric is generally persuasive, right? Or argumentative even. Teaching and instruction are more like debates, even back then. And in science and medical fields, there was argumentative reasoning factored into informative speaking, basically. It didn't look quite like it does today. While most instruction is now verbal, for most of modern history, it was learning by doing. And apprenticeships were kind of what took over. So what facilitated the change from argumentative and demonstrative teaching to verbal and informative teaching? Well, the biggest change, I guess, would be the democratization of information. Information is much more ready and available to people. Technical information used to be protected highly. I remember on the farm we had a John Deere tractor, and we couldn't get service manuals for it because it was a newer tractor and they wanted us to bring it in for service. Eventually that tractor went away and was replaced by a different brand of tractor, just simply because we couldn't get information and fix it ourselves. Now with YouTube, think about how many things we can fix around our house, right? But back in the day, technical information was like your family business of making rugs. You weren't going to share with too many other people how to make rugs because you'd create competition and therefore hurt your family's business. Now society generally believes that all information should be shared and made public. So when we think about that, that created this more informal or informative, not informal, informative speech structure. Also, the increasing complexity of fields of knowledge and the many, many more professions that we have now versus the ancient world increased the need for informative speaking as well. So when we think about informative speech topics, we need to pick a topic that engages and educates your audience. Informative speaking usually happens at one of three levels: formal, vocational, or impromptu. The levels of informative speech, when we think about that, let's talk about formal. Formal speeches occur when an audience is assembled specifically to hear something you say. Being invited to speak for a group at a professional meeting like, I don't know, Civic Center, Chamber of Commerce, things like that, or even a celebration gala, comes with high expectations, and it kind of signifies that you're kind of there in your career. You are one of the leaders and movers and shakers, and people want to know what you know. I've been asked many times to be a keynote speaker, and most of the time I want to make sure it's about things that group can use, knowledge that they can take back with them and have for their business. So, people deliver informative speeches at vocational level, right, at various parts of their careers. I spend a lot of time lecturing, right, informative speech. Human resource professionals give presentations, training people give training to new employees, technicians at factories convey training videos or speeches about how machines should be maintained and operated, right? Even a restaurant, the chef might teach others how to make a dish. The speech at the vocational level may convey detailed information about a process, a concept, or an issue relevant to a specific career. Lastly, we convey information daily in our regular interactions. When we give a freshman directions on campus, right? That's a short informative speech. When we talk about a TV show to our friends, that's a bit of an informative speech, unless we're persuading them to watch it. You're going to see some similarities between informative and persuasive. We'll talk about the differences, though, as well. Informative speeches can be not practiced, meaning impromptu, right? With little to no time before giving a speech. That's happened to me several times. When you think about researching your topic for an informative speech, making sure that you weed through lots of information is important. You need to give them good information that captures the audience, that tries to make sure that it belies the seriousness of the nature of your speech. You need to make sure that you find sources that are objective, balanced, and credible. Periodicals, books, newspapers, and credible websites can be useful for informative speeches. We talk about that in public speaking, right? But it's important to find good quality information and make sure it's factual. Don't be Dan Rather and get fired from your job at CBS Evening News because you didn't fact check a story. Informative speakers also need to take time to find engaging information. Stuff that's going to keep people interested, stuff that applies to their career. Again, sharp research skills can come in handy here as well. Think about getting pieces of information that not many know about. Novel information, right? It's unexpected, but it takes a lot more time to locate and bring it to your audience, but once you do, it can make a boring topic seem more alive, right? A student recently delivered an engaging speech about coupons in my public speaking class. That would have been class in the fall. And I would not have thought I would have been engaged in a coupon public speech, informative speech. It was just simply the benefits of couponing. Coupons have been around for 125 years, and it's been used by wealthy people. It actually started in wealthier people and more educated households. And they also brought in Ponzi, which I did know that part, but I didn't really think about the involvement of coupons in Ponzi. That's actually how he did his Ponzi scheme. So they took a topic that I would have deemed kind of not interesting and turned it into quite an interesting speech. Remember, the goal for an informative speech is to teach your audience. Your audience is more likely to be engaged if they are actively learning, but yet you can't feed them so much information that you overload, right? We talk about information overload, right? Being overwhelmed, shutting down. And if you know a lot about a topic, it can be easy to overload the students with too much information. That's what I try to keep my lectures to a certain timeline, certain time amount here, to where you're not sitting for too long of a period of time. And you could even break those down into, split it into half, watch half of it on one session, half in another session, because I don't want to bombard you with too much information. Also, a very critical flaw of those of us who give a lot of speeches is sometimes we overestimate our audience's knowledge, or we underestimate their knowledge. Meaning we might talk down to them, give them too much basic information. If we underestimate, if we overestimate, we'll leave big holes of information that they have no idea what we're talking about, and therefore they won't be interested. They'll be just kind of like, I have no idea what he's talking about, or she is talking about. Organizing and supporting an informative speech. Excuse me. To effectively teach, a speaker must present quality information in an organized and accessible way, right? So once you've chosen your topic, put your research skills to the test. It's time to organize that data and support your speech. There are 3 organizational patterns. We talk about this in public speaking, but I figure we need to go over it one more time. Topical, chronological, and spatial. To organize the speech topically, you need to break it down, the topic, into subdivisions, logical breakdowns. If we think about a speech on labor unions, you could focus on unions in different areas of employment, or 3 historically significant strikes, or 3 significant legal and legislative decisions. 3 is a great number, by the way. 3 proves a point. 2, it seems like, we're stretching. 1 doesn't prove anything. And more than 3 seems to be an information overload. That's what we found. 3 is our sweet spot. Speeches organized chronologically trace the development of a topic or overview. So, an informative speech on the rise of the economic crisis in Greece would explain the steps in creating, would explain how it happened, what caused, what decisions were made early, what decisions were made in the midterm, and then maybe even how Greece can overcome this, because they literally had to file bankruptcy. A country had to file bankruptcy. Another speech we could do chronologically would be the steps of creating a home compost pile. Boring topic, but could be interesting to some folks, right? Speeches organized spatially convey a layout or physical characteristics of a location or concept. I gave an informative speech with organizational, spatial type speech once when I talked about, in an architecture class, a building, and I walked people from the top floor to the bottom floor. We talked about ornamentation on the outside. We also talked about how the building was laid out, ornamentation on the inside, and how functional this building was. So I kind of started at the top, worked my way to the bottom, and I chose to go top to bottom because the top of the building, while ornate, wasn't as amazingly ornate as the lobby of this building. So I wanted to finish strong. So that's another way of doing, when you give your speech, try to finish strong. All right. So when someone recently gave me a speech, I think it was a couple semesters ago, about astrology, and they went through all the star signs. And they started with the first sign, and they finished with the last sign. I saw the pattern. I saw this organization pattern there. Maybe others may not have picked it up, but I understood enough about astrology that, or at least the star signs, that I could follow that pattern, that organization. When we think about informing people, we're trying to get a point across, right? We're trying to get them information. There are types and strategies for incorporating supporting data into speeches, or material into speeches, and they're discussed in preparing a speech, which we didn't read in this book, right? We didn't go over a lot of stuff about speeches because, again, that's what public speaking class is. But I needed to include a bit. There's some specific ways about developing ideas within informative speeches. Most speakers inform an audience using definitions, descriptions, demonstrations, and explanations. Sorry, explanations should have been bolded. Apologize about that. It's likely that a speaker will combine all of those methods into one speech. When we inform someone by definition, think about it, it's simple. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but literally think about definition, dictionary. Think about what words really mean and what a topic really means. Now, we don't always have to use a dictionary definition. Remember, synonyms are words that have similar meaning. And antonyms mean opposite things. So it's a way to engage your audience. You can keep them understanding through use of those. But I would stick more towards concrete words. Concrete or direct words linking to that, what the topic is about. So, informing through definition. We think about describing things. We have to do it all the time, right? Think about QR codes. They're everywhere anymore, right? Some people don't really understand, especially the older crowd, don't understand what they do. But as a speaker, you could define what QR codes are by their function. By informing audiences that QR code allow businesses, organizations, individuals, or to get information to consumers or receivers through that barcode-like format. And it can be easily accessed on our smartphones. When we think about defining things too, I had a speech given about the Titanic, and they talked about the good, the imaginary, and we're not sure if this was true. And one of the things they talked about in that speech, which I thought was brilliant, was the fact that people were looking for survivors from the sunken ship with flashlights, but flashlights had yet to be invented. And even, we laugh about it, oh my gosh, people make mistakes, right? I do it all the time. I catch cars that are not period for the movie setting time. And I'm like, that car, if this is set in this year, well, that car wasn't released until 2 or 3 or 4 years later, just because I know cars. It's one of my things. But lots of people did it. Even Shakespeare. In Julius Caesar, he references a clock, but mechanical clocks didn't exist during Shakespeare's time. So make sure when we're presenting our information, we're giving good examples, and we're giving them correct information. Etymology refers to the history of a word. That means, where does it come from? What does it mean? Because part of its meaning is derived from where it comes from. The word assassin literally translates into hashish eater, and it's an Arabic word, hashishashin. We get our meaning of assassin through the interaction with European countries in the Crusades with the Muslims. And many of the Muslims would get high on a hashish, and then they would go into almost like a berserker type rage. They would assassinate them. They would sometimes sneak up on them. Sometimes they would just be brutal. But the point is, there's a word that now is in our language, assassin, that comes from something else. And every word comes from something else. Remember that we can describe, inform through description, right? We can tell our audience, give them a picture, paint them a picture. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? If those descriptions are well written, you can evoke a sensory reaction in your audience. I've had speeches given about baking pies. Between seeing the baked pie, them telling me about the baked pie, I really wanted the baked pie. And then, of course, there's speeches given through demonstration. And again, some of this is information I shared in public speaking, but not everyone takes both courses, so I'm trying to give you a quick overview and help you in your informative speeches in your careers. Demonstration is just that, showing someone how something is done, right? It's important because many, many, many of us need to see something and then do it ourselves. I cannot tell you how many things I have fixed on my car. I'm okay as a mechanic. It's not my strong suit, but I'm not bad at it. Grew up on a farm where we had to work on things, so I grew up working on my own cars. I can't tell you how many times I fixed things on my cars just by watching YouTube videos and then doing it myself. And then, of course, informing through explanation, it's showing how something works. This is most useful when something's really complex or abstract and hard to demonstrate, right? When you're presenting complex information, make sure you break up the topic into manageable units, avoid information overload like I talked about earlier, and make sure that the examples are relevant to your audience. I really wanted to put in the slide where it talks about in the book the Lincoln Douglas debates, but there's a slide of me and my wife standing in between these two that we got a passerby to take. There's Lincoln. He's on the right-hand side of the page, and Douglas on the left-hand side of the page. And this is Alton, Illinois. It's one of our favorite getaways when we're in the Midwest. And literally, the debate took place right there. It was covered by hundreds of newspapers because newspaper was the thing back then, right? And so it was a big deal. And if you ever want to look back and try to figure out who Lincoln was as a person and how he got to the place he was, this is one of those key moments for him in his life. But again, explain something. Make sure you're breaking it down into manageable units, step by step, how you're going to do something or how something is done. Now, the big thing is, and I see it all the time, is people slip from informative to persuasion, trying to sell you on this, trying to get you to think their way. Don't do it. And the other problem I see most often is information overload. We're just trying to cover too many topics. I did throw this YouTube in there if you want to watch it. You know, you're not required to, but I would suggest that you watch it. It really talks, it dives into engaging with your audience, how to engage with your audience. Audience want, and in the end, really, audience want to be somewhat entertained. They want to learn a new or fresh perspective. They want to feel good about the information that you've given them. For those who haven't taken my public speaking course, of course, I recommend it. If you're having difficulty or trying to figure out how to lay out or understand the differences between informative and persuasive speech, the last few pages of Unit 11 Section 1 talks about that. Remember, you're informing them, not trying to persuade. And here's why you don't want to persuade in an informative speech, because if you step to persuading, audiences can start turning off, because then it's not about information, it's about opinion. So let's talk. Now that we talked about informative, let's talk about persuasive. We produce and receive persuasive messages daily. If you don't believe me, check out how many times someone's tried to sell you something, either on social media, on television, on radio, right? But we don't often think about how we choose to make arguments, or sometimes we don't even really think about the quality of the arguments that we're receiving, those commercials that we might be receiving, right? And in this section, I'm going to break that apart. I'm going to talk about the components of an argument or persuasion, how to choose a good persuasive topic, or how to adapt and organize your message to be persuasive. So when we think about the foundation of persuasion, it seeks to influence beliefs, attitudes, values, or behaviors of audience members. And it's made up, the argument section is made up of 3 components. A claim, meaning what we're going to persuade you about, evidence that we can show why something is a certain way and why you should feel a certain way, and then a warrant. The claim is the evidence that you're supporting. The claim, yes, the statement that you're going to be supporting with your evidence, right? That's your claim. It's your overall thesis statement of your persuasive speech, right? Your evidence is your grounds or your support, your information, and the warrant is the underlying justification that connects the claim to the evidence. We'll talk a little more about that. The quality of your evidence most often impacts the strength of your warrant, and some warrants by virtue are a little stronger than others. For example, I don't know many people who are going to defend drinking and driving. Right? It's pretty straightforward. Drink, you drive, you could potentially kill somebody or injure yourself or others. So most people aren't going to sit there on the sidelines and go, oh yeah, I'm rooting pro drunk driving. No. So that warrant is pretty strong, right? It doesn't take much to persuade an audience to, yeah, let's not drive drunk. As you're putting together your persuasive argument, you are the judge. You can evaluate arguments that come across in your research or in life. Analyze the connection between the warrant and the claim and the evidence. If your warrant's too strong, you might want to highlight that in your argument of your speech. Just like I said, drunk driving. I don't know anybody that's pro-drunk driving. I'm sure there's someone out there, but I don't know anyone. Now, if you have a weak warrant, meaning your argument kind of doesn't really go against, it kind of goes against your position, your feelings on something, you probably want to include that in the speech as well. It's giving people information. A persuasive speech is informing them, but then asking them to believe a certain way or do a certain thing from the information they gathered in the speech. Good persuasive topics. Sorry I popped my pee. I apologize. Good persuasive topics are current, controversial, and have important implications for society. It's the kind of stuff that you're going to talk about at the dinner table. It's the kind of stuff that the television news or social media is going to be putting out there, right? It's the kind of topic that students might be discussing around school. Many of those topics are controversial. That's what helped get them attention. Also remember, current and controversial topics are more engaging for your audience. And it must matter to you. The topic must be important to you and society as a whole. Otherwise, you're going to deliver a weak speech. Competent speakers in persuasive messaging really take into consideration their audience. Persuasive messages seek to directly influence your audience, so you have to adapt your message to your audience if you want to be effective. Ways you can do that is to take a poll on your audience or find similar audience data in regard to your topic. What do they feel about your topic, right? Then focus on intensifying people who agree with your position to move them from agreement into action stage. When I talk about persuasive messaging in the art of persuasion in the public speaking class, I say this, and it's true. You're not moving somebody who's very negative about something to being a activist and they're positive about something, right? You're looking to move the needle part way. Think about it as like your gas tank in your car. You're going to move that. You're going to move that either towards one side or towards the other in smaller amounts, in like a quarter of the whole dial in one setting. Now, sometimes you'll get lucky and hit a home run, and someone will go all the way from negative to pro. But the reality is, we as people don't want to agree with those things. It works counterintuitive to us. We don't want to be persuaded as a whole. All right? Always make sure you're informing your audience about the problem and how it relates to them. Also, I want you to think about, make sure you're viewed as credible, provide strong data, acknowledge positions of agreement, and you can indeed counter-argue. When you think about a persuasive speech, they typically fall within three categories: propositions of fact, propositions of value, or propositions of policy. Propositions of fact focus on beliefs and try to establish that something is or isn't. Propositions of value focus on persuading audience members that something is good, bad, right, wrong, likable, unlikable. Propositions of policies are something should be done or shouldn't be done about something. When you think about determining a proposition, you need to think about what your speech is about and then which one of those would apply. You want to present logical arguments based on good information, not slanted information, and you want to acknowledge someone else's point of view, but then show them what, through good information, that maybe they should change their point of thinking, their reference point. Propositions of value may require you to appeal more to your audience emotion, and you'll have to cite expert and lay testimonies, meaning expert testimony, lay people. You're going to have to really rely on experts. Persuasive speeches about policy can usually require you to research existing and previous laws or procedures, right? And determine if any relevant legislation or propositions are currently being considered or should be considered. Now, persuasive speech thesis statements by organizational pattern. There's several organizational patterns. We're diving a little deeper than public speaking on this, but we do cover some of the basics on this. Problem, solution. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's all here on the slide, so if you want to pause it, read through it all. Problem, fail, solution, proposed solution. Meaning we've tried to solve, we've got a problem, we've tried to solve the problem, it didn't work, here's another solution. Cause, effect. Then there's cause, effect. Sometimes multiple things cause something to happen. There's also cause, effect, meaning there could be more than one effect from a cause. And then there's cause, effect, solution, where again you're looking at there's a cause, there's an effect, but here's a solution to stop the cycle. When we think about public speaking, and especially persuasive speeches, Monroe's motivated sequence is an organizational pattern. Again, I'm coming back to it. We talked about it. We talked about it in public speaking as well. But it's really designed to come into real play within persuasive speaking. And I pop my P's again. Doggone it. I know better. I need a dust cover for my mic. I'll get one soon. If your persuasive speaking goals are call to action, you might want to consider this organizational pattern because it tends to be successful. Attention. You need to hook them. What is the hook going to be? I don't know. Ask Murphy Lee. But no, seriously. Find a hook. Find a hook. Get them, draw them in. Show them the need. Prove the need. Then offer a solution. Then visualize that solution to the audience and then call them to action. It's literally how you can break it down, and it applies to, Monroe's motivational speaking series. It's that sequence of ideas our brain uses to move ourselves to a next level. Now, don't fall into fallacies, and we're going to talk more about that, but let's talk about reasoning first. We're going to use certain reasonings to help our audience see things. But be careful of using too basic of a reasoning and not accounting for other variables. Remember cause, effect? Sometimes there's more than one cause before something happens. So we need to look at these fallacies in reasoning that will help you be a more critical consumer to persuasive messages. Because remember, you don't want to fall victim to everybody that's trying to sell you the next big thing. Reasoning refers to the process of making sense of the things around us. Simple as that. It'll be on the final. In order to understand our experiences and draw conclusions from this information, as well as present new ideas, we must use reasoning. We often reason without even thinking about it. But sometimes we become more aware, and in those moments we become more powerful, and we become better consumers, and also better communicators. The three types of reasoning we will explore in this section are inductive, deductive, and causal. My goodness. Inductive reasoning. Arguments that persuade by citing examples that build us to a conclusion. So inductive is just stacking it up, right? Inductive reasoning teaches conclusions through the citation of examples, and it's most often used of the logic reasoning methods to persuade someone. This is less emotion-based and more logic-based, right? This is a powerful message, but not everyone thinks this way. Not everyone uses logic. So let's talk about inductive reasoning. When we think about using inductive reasoning, it's more cognizant, it's more convincing and more relevant, and generally pulls in emotion more. Now, you're still using concrete, real things, but you're trying to draw on emotional and inductive reasoning. When you logically present examples as evidence as you build a conclusion, your audience may be persuaded by your evidence before they realize the coming conclusion is even going to get to them. Now, remember I told you we don't want our opinions changed, really. We don't want to go through life and just be in a space. When our mindset starts to be altered, our belief system starts to be altered, this creates cognitive dissonance, and we're going to talk more about that. But not yet. Stay tuned. More about inductive reasoning. When we reason by analogy, or we're more using inductive reasoning, it's kind of not always the best one. It is a very emotionally based one. It's saying that it's almost like if-then statements. And it's always saying that the same information will create the same results. But that's not very factual. That's not very true. But this is used to create an emotional response and try to drive you to make a change, to be persuaded in some way. All right. When we think about inductive reasoning, examples should be sufficient, meaning that there's enough to support conclusion. Otherwise, you're committing a hasty generalization fallacy. We don't want to explain too much, but we don't want to give them too little information. Sometimes we cherry pick. For those who don't know what cherry picking, it's we're picking specific examples of something to create an argument that only suit our conclusion to the persuasion message, right? And audience see through cherry picking. Most do. So I have a little slide here that talks about inductive reasoning. It really kind of goes deeper into this. I'm gonna, again, this is one of those spots where you want to pause it, read through it, make sure you're getting this information. It's not really, I'm not going to really push it on the test, but it is important to persuasive messaging. When we think about deductive reasoning, we're really counting on people to kind of know some things and be able to make a decision off of knowledge. When we think about deductive reasoning, though, it can fail us at times, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. A syllogism is an example of deductive reasoning that is used when teaching logic. Syllogisms are an example in which conclusion is supported by minor and major premises. The conclusion of a valid argument can be deducted, therefore, from those major and minor premises. So here's a way to walk through this one. A syllogism would be, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Socrates is immortal. In this case, the conclusion, Socrates is mortal, is derived from the major premise that all human is mortal, and therefore, because Socrates is human, then he is mortal. Well, this one holds up, but sometimes we twist it and don't think it all the way through. All presidents have lived in the White House. That's our major premise. George Washington was a president. Minor premise. George Washington lived in the White House. That's our conclusion, but guess what? The first president to live in the White House was John Adams, not George Washington. Therefore, that kind of logic pattern proves to be false. It goes back to picking good data. You can even have a faulty logic, even if both premises are true, but if they're just not related closely enough, you can create a false issue. So think about penguins are black and white, right? They're two colors, mainly black and white. That's our major premise. Some old television shows are also in black and white, right? That's our minor premise. So some penguins are also old television shows, right? Come on. Believe it or not, I see these being applied, not quite to that dramatic level, but in some of the speeches I get to see. When we think about causal reasoning, it's cause and effect. We're looking at this creates that. So eating more local foods will boost the local economy, and it will make you healthier. Maybe. It's possible, right? But is it true? Is that a true cause effect? Not really, right? Because what if I choose to decide to eat? I'm going to go to J-More, and I'm going to stock up on all the sugary jams and jellies. And I'm going to eat those every meal, all the time. And when I want a snack, I'm going to go toast some bread, and I'm going to put some of that jam on there. See, it's local, but I'm not eating healthy, and therefore that causal reasoning didn't make sense there, right? When we think about causal reasoning, it's an X cause Y, or X influences Y is more accurate, because sometimes it's not a cause. Sometimes things happen. For instance, I was recently in a car accident. It was not my fault. I was paying attention, but someone could say, well, you got in a car accident because you didn't pay attention. All car accidents are caused by people not paying attention. Well, maybe all car accidents are caused by people not paying attention, but I was paying attention. Now the other driver, I don't know. right? So we have to be careful with cause-effect reasoning. So when we think about other arguments, we can use inductive arguing. Again, we're trying to support our conclusion by reasoning, by an analogy, by taking the evidence and giving us worst case scenario. We can use those, right? Deductive is always, again, remember what I told you earlier, we're really counting on a bit of what people already know, and then new information we gave them to reinforce what people already know. Causal, again, cause effect. And let's talk about the fallacies of reasoning. When we talk about fallacies of reasoning, there are more than 125 of these, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to go with the top 10. I see these all the time. They're usually from speakers that didn't do their homework, didn't fact check, didn't look at the information completely, or didn't take the time to give us enough information to make that persuasive speech happen. Politicians are the best at this, by the way. Hasty generalization. Hasty generalization is a fallacy that relates to inductive reasoning and results in too few examples being cited, meaning you're only going to give one or two examples. It's kind of that jumping to conclusions theory, right? And it's tempting for us humans because we value time and we may have already made up our mind anyway. But well-researched and supported arguments with good information is key to being an effective and ethical speaker. Making a claim that train travel is not safe and citing 2 train derailments that may have resulted in injury doesn't present that strong warrant. Doesn't say, hey, trains are dangerous and we need to not use them. Right? Because think about how many train rides go off without a hitch. How many trains travel the country delivering goods without a problem. False analogy and false cause. These kind of relate a little bit. They're kind of similar, and I'll go through them. The false analogy fallacy also is an inductive reasoning fallacy and results when the situations or circumstances being compared aren't really similar enough. The common false analogy that people make is comparing something to putting people on the moon. If we can put a person on the moon, why can't we figure out a way to make this happen? Whatever this is, right? The question really doesn't acknowledge it's 2 completely different things, right? 2 things that aren't related. So, but we hear people saying, well, it's not rocket science. Well, no, it's not, but it doesn't mean it's easy to everyone. The false cause fallacy relates to causal reasoning and occurs when speakers argue without enough evidence that one thing is caused or causes another. It's in Latin called post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after this, or therefore because of this. Bad luck is not a result of a broken mirror or a black cat. Sometimes bad things just happen in life, right? But yet some people talk about bad things happen because it's the fates, right? It's because of these bad things or these things I've done. Bandwagon. We've all seen the bandwagon fallacy. Your mom and your dad have used this one on you. They said, if everyone else jumped, you wanted to go to the party, right? Well, and you told them, everyone's going, well, if everyone else jumped off a bridge, would you jump off the bridge? Right? That's the fallacy in our argument, right? And as a child, like, we're saying everyone's doing it. Well, no, not everyone was doing it, first of all. There were probably some uncool kids who were most definitely not going to the party. And there were probably some cool kids who couldn't make it to the party for various reasons as well. So that all or nothing's not great on our part, right? I cannot tell you how many people have tried to use bandwagon as a smashing, instead of doing the research and giving me lots of points, they're going to just smash me with a cause-effect kind of thing and say, this is why, and we must do it this way. Because there's many times in life, there's multiple solutions to a problem we need to think about, not just one. So popular appeal and frequency use are not strong warrants to support any kind of argument. Just because something's popular doesn't mean it's good. And I can tell you this because think about this. The music you're listening to right now, is it going to survive the test of 20 to 30 years from now? Is it still going to be popular? Is it still going to be good? False dilemma. This is a fallacy that occurs when the speaker speaks rhetorically and backs his or her audience into a corner. It's literally a this or that, right? That's where I was kind of going earlier. They're forcing you to make a choice, either this or that, without enough information. Most of life is not black or white, good or bad, right or wrong. It's some sort of spot somewhere in the middle. Part of why I love my schnoodle, my Schnauzer Poodle mix. She is like 40 shades of gray, all the way from black, or dark charcoal rather, to almost white. And that's much how life around us works. There's very few decisions that are ever this or that, good or bad, right or wrong. And when we try to force people to do this, and politicians are the best at it, because you don't believe like me, so therefore you must be wrong. Well, first of all, people are entitled to their opinion, and if they're wrong, they're wrong. It's okay. We need to just stop with that kind of hateful rhetoric. Ad hominem. That refers to the person in Latin. That's literally what it means. And it's a fallacy of attacking someone rather than the argument. It's when somebody's given you some information and you can't refute the information, but you tell them that they're ugly or they're mean. I'm seeing this ad hominem a lot from the executive branch right now. They're insulting reporters. Just because a reporter asks tough questions, we talk about their being ugly or they're creating fake news. No, they're trying to cover an angle on a story, and people will figure out if it's a relevant angle or story or not. It's up to us to choose what we're going to consume, right? Don't in your personal life use ad hominem. Slippery slope. I've done this one a couple times. It's where you're saying X leads to Y leads to Z. If we take one step down an icy hill, it might be difficult for us to get back up, and you'll slide all the way down, right? That's kind of the idea set. But is it a guarantee you're going to fall? Is it a guarantee you're not going to be able to get yourself back up? I gave you a slippery slope example here about U.S. foreign policy. If the U.S. goes to help this country in need, then we're going to be expected to intervene every other time that there's conflict within the world, right? That's kind of one of those slippery slope things. Each case is individual, but yet sometimes we try to group them together. Doggone it. All right, I got more to go. Red herring. I love this one, but I'm not going to go over tons of it because I realize I still have a third of my slides, and then we're closing in on the 54-minute mark. Red herring makes an argument that distracts the people from the discussion at hand. It's like calling somebody a communist or something. Okay? Rather than discuss the actual topic. Appeal to tradition is a fallacy that argues that something should continue because it's the way things have been done before. But if we did that, women would have never earned the right to vote, right? Would even slavery have been abolished if we just did things the way it was done before? I'm not saying it's right, but people use this argument, well, that's the way it's always been done. Let's talk about persuasive strategies now. I'm in 11.4 in the book, if you're following along. Do you think you're easily persuaded? Most people don't think they're easily persuaded, right? It's a difficult thing because people don't want to change their mind because they have to think about the fact that they might have been misinformed or ill-informed or they were wrong about something, and we don't want to be wrong about something. We want to be right. In this section, we'll talk about the 9 persuasive strategies you can use to effectively influence audience members' beliefs, attitudes, and values. Ethos, logos, pathos, positive motivation, negative motivation, cognitive dissonance. Talked about that earlier. We're going to get to talk about it in depth in a moment. Appeal to safety needs, appeal to social needs, and appeal to self-esteem needs. When we think about ethos, pathos, and logos are all interrelated. Aristotle came up with these. Ethos refers to the credibility of a speaker in 3 dimensions. Are they confident? Are they trustworthy? And are they dynamic? Competence, is literally the perception of the public speakers. Are they expert? Are they good at what they do? Good at what they say? Are they using English properly? Trustworthiness is, do you believe the information coming out of their mouth? Is it discernible? Is it non-manipulated? Dynamism is just simply that, charisma, energy, right? Charisma is a mixture of the abstract and concrete qualities that make a speaker attractive to an audience. People who are charismatic usually know they're charismatic because they've been told that whole lives. They've all heard it over and over, and they found that people were attracted to them. Unfortunately, charisma, you can't easily adapt that skill. Some people have it naturally, others do not, but dynamism, energy, the way you send your information across can be adapted. You can communicate with enthusiasm for your topic, right? You can project that image, that energy, and that enthusiasm and give the audience something bigger than what. Maybe you're not charismatic, but you can give them a big speech. And they'll feel, maybe, in that moment that you are charismatic. Logos, but not logos. Logos, not logos. We're not talking Nike, Coca-Cola. I can teach a class on that, advertising, but we're not. Logos refers to the logic or reasoning of an argument. Meaning we need good information, we need credible information to support our claims. If we do that, people will believe us, or at least start to think to believe us. You can cite your personal experiences, but those don't hold as much value. When we talk about experts and what their stories would tell and what the experts show, suddenly we begin to get through to our audience. And while I do believe that personal experience is important and showing them personal information, like, I don't mean personal as in personal, to prying, I mean like a story that backs up what the scientists have already proven about a disease or a medicine, right? And making it into a personal statement, meaning showing how that disease or that medicine affects someone's life, either positively or negatively, carries a lot of power. But we still need the evidence, the real evidence. Pathos refers to emotional appeals. And Aristotle was too suspicious of too much emotion within people's appeals, because pathos doesn't take into account logos. It doesn't take into account logic. Pathos is pure emotion. If we make all our decisions on pure emotion, what would it be? What would our life be like? We need to think about emotions lose their persuasive effect more quickly in the persuasive speech appeal, right? That's why it's important to give them good information, good data to work off of, then try to use some emotion. I'll give you an example here. You can watch it, you don't have to. But if you want to learn more, that's why I'm giving you these. What do great speakers do? Great speakers strive to appeal to all 3. Ethos, pathos, logos within that speech. Because all of us think All of us are attuned to one of those paths, a little bit more than the other paths. And if I can get to you in all three levels, I've got a chance to change your ideas, change your mind, or to deliver something in a way that's going to strike you and pull at your heart. And I give you that speech there. We had a U.S. president who was formerly an actor, and he was good at delivering lines. He also had excellent speechwriters at his disposal, and this was an event that happened in my childhood which should have traumatized me and given me PTSD and all of those things, but it didn't. And part of the reason it didn't is because of this speech. I still wanted to be an astronaut. I just wasn't good at math and science, so I didn't get to be an astronaut. But watch that speech. He delivers his lines. Great speech writing. An excellent topic that he covered in it was a very sensitive topic, but right after it happened, and sought to unify the country and also hold people into heroic status for wanting to travel into space. Remember, listening competence is important as well. We need to listen to people's speeches. We need to be able to think about what they're saying and what their purpose for what they're saying is. And if we do that, bringing back our listening skills, we won't be easily persuaded when the message is weak, when it's too emotional or not logical. Dissonance, motivation, and needs. Aristotle's three rhetorics, ethos, logos, pathos, have been employed for thousands of years. They're still employed within advertising and everywhere, even in human psychology. So persuasive strategies are employed by, advertisers, marketers, politicians, even in our interpersonal relationships. Psychology-based persuasive appeals that we're going to discuss are cognitive dissonance, positive and negative motivation, and appeal to needs. I mentioned cognitive dissonance earlier. Cognitive dissonance is the kind of result of when we don't want to change our mind about something. And for those who've studied music, you know exactly what dissonance is. And if you don't know what dissonance is, listen to the TV theme show Severance's the piano work, the chords, all right? And I've included that on the YouTube there. Sometimes when notes are played, they make these notes produce sounds that are appealing to our ears. But the same chords, if they're played in different combinations, make us wince or uncomfortable because they're not so pleasant to our ears. Same chords, just in a different sequence. The TV show Severance, he does it wonderfully in his theme. He plays the same chords. You'll hear it. It's melodic in moments. It's just not as melodic in other moments. So that same principle applies to cognitive dissonance, which is our mental discomfort that results when we get new information that clashes or contradicts with currently held beliefs, values, or attitudes. We don't like cognitive dissonance in our lives. When you use cognitive dissonance as a persuasive strategy, though, and you can, by upsetting people and then giving them an alternative that is more appealing to them, it's based off the three assumptions. People have need for consistency in their thinking. When inconsistency exists, people express psychological discomfort, and this discomfort motivates people to address the inconsistency to restore a balance within their brain, within their thoughts, within their beliefs. So when we get new information that clashes with previously held information, we deal with a period of unpleasantness, hence cognitive dissonance, and we have to try to reconcile that difference in our brains. When we apply the cognitive dissonance theory and strategy, it's not a one message one time. We know people are resistant to change. We don't want to be persuaded. So it's basically an exposure process. We're giving them information, trying to get them to change their mind or move their needle towards changing their mind. But we're not going to get it done in one session. Now, if we were truly 100% rational, we would. We could see new information, read the information, verify the information, and go, I made a mistake, I'm wrong, and then change our opinion that quickly. But it doesn't work that way. If you don't believe in cognitive dissonance, think about smokers. Ask them, is smoking bad for them? I mean, they know smoking's bad for them. They've been told that it's going to kill them eventually, but yet they cannot or will not quit smoking. That is a key cognitive dissonance response. Now, we conduct a bunch of acrobatics within our brain to get ourselves out of dissonance. Sometimes we discredit the speaker or the sources of their information. We hold ourselves to be an exception to the rule. We think we're special. We only use parts and pieces of the information that support our own beliefs, but not what the speaker's trying to tell us. Or we just ignore all of it altogether. As you can see, none of those actually represents in a person modifying their thinking, meaning the persuasive goals are not met. But people can't avoid dissonant information forever. So when they're bombarded by that information repeatedly, it creates the cognitive dissonance, and we eventually learn to change our minds or our thought behavior. And we might change our opinion. We might move from that into a better place. Positive and negative motivation. We're almost done. Hang in there. Positive and negative motivation, we pretty much know what those are, right? When we use positive motivation, the speaker is implicitly or explicitly conveying to the audience that listening to their message and or following their advice will lead to positive results in their life. Of course, negative motivation implies that states that failure to follow the speaker's advice or information will result in negative consequences. This goes back to appeal to needs, our hierarchy as well. When we think about appeal to needs, we have to have certain levels met before we can even think about other things. When we think about also I'm going to swing back here real quick. Positive and negative motivation. Think about how many times politicians use either positive or negative motivation to try to get you to feel a certain way about whatever it is they're talking about. They're kind of the masters at it. So are advertisers, marketing industry. Those two work hand in hand, by the way. Have for years. Many people that work in advertising also work on politicians' campaigns, both Republican and Democrat. Just saying. So when we think about meeting our needs, we have to get to one level of needs. If we're hungry, we're not so worried about safety. Once we're fed, we can start thinking about safety. Once we have our safety needs met, we can be social animals. We can think about finding those things. Once we have the social needs met, we start to fill in our self-esteem needs, and we start to figure out who we are as a person, eventually self-actualization, right? Since the needs are fundamental to human survival and happiness, tapping into needs is a common persuasive strategy. Appeal to needs are often paired with positive or negative motivation, which can increase the persuasive message. Psychological needs form the basis of a hierarchy of needs. The closer the needs are to the base, the more important they are to human survival. Speakers do not appeal to physiological needs typically. After all, a person who doesn't have food, air, water, right, it's not worried about anything being persuaded, because they're going to have to get those needs met. Some speakers appeal to the self-actualization needs, but again, it's hard to do ethically. So most of the time, they're targeting us in our upper level needs. Some example of pursuing higher education in intellectual fulfillment, pursuing art or music, or pursuing religious or spiritual fulfillment, again, higher up in the needs space. These are things we usually do by ourselves and for ourselves. So we kind of almost call that area sacred, but yet still persuasive speakers will focus sometimes in that area. But ultimately, if you're struggling as a family because the cost of living has gone up exceptionally over the last 2 to 3 years. I mean, my family's spending more than we used to. I ended up having to change insurance companies that I've been with for 30 years to find a cheaper insurer because our insurance costs were getting out through the roof. Because the company I'd been with had a lot of claims. Not from me, in general. I lost a lot of houses to hurricanes, wildfires in the West. It's just one of those things. But we had to change. My family had to change because it was affecting us on more of a basic level needs. To put some money back in our pocket to counter the other places in life where costs have gone up. Meaning, I was thinking about physiological and safety needs. So I was able to be targeted in that area. Now, that said, I wasn't blind. I was looking for ways to save money, and I found a way to save money by switching insurance carriers. It made me available to be persuaded to do something different. We satisfy our needs when we work to preserve our safety and the safety of our loved ones, right? That's what I was doing there, was keeping us all safe. Also, there's negative motivation sometimes, and we think about fear as a negative motivator. One of my fears was, will they give me good enough claim service in the event that we do have a claim? Not that we get claims often. My family doesn't, but it was one of those things. If you think about using fear appeals, not exactly, this is way deeper than a 100, 200 level course, but I'm going to give you this. Don't overuse fear appeals in your personal life because you start to alienate people and or create real fear. And if you're trying to use fear appeals, the threat must be credible and supportable by evidence, meaning people must be able to see it, and you can empower your audience to address the threat rather than decide a certain way. You're kind of circling them around to face the fear and attack the fear, not being persuaded to make a different decision. Again, social needs were met through interpersonal relationships, intimate relationships. Here you see we're targeted by don't be left out or be in the in-group. Everybody's got this clothing or this car or this whatever, right? That's how they try to persuade us. And that's within our, again, social needs section, because we want to be like the Joneses. We got to keep up with the Joneses, right? How we're going to be targeted, or how we can target in the appeal for needs section. You'll see it from public radio. We'll try to persuade people to donate money to a station. Health and beauty companies are the best at this because you need this. You need this makeup. Because if you don't have our makeup, the other makeup's just garbage. Right? Be real. For us guys, if you don't have this deodorant, you're just going to be stinky sweating. And then no girls are going to like you, or guys, or whatever it is you want to attract. Right? We fall into that. It's our self-esteem. It's our ego. Car manufacturers will really drill hard on this too. You don't want to drive a Hyundai, you want to drive a BMW, you want to drive a Mercedes, you want a Range Rover. I just want a reliable car that doesn't cost me an arm and a leg and gets reasonably good gas mileage. It has the ability to ride pretty good and take us on vacations occasionally. That's what I'm looking for, right? But some people are not. Some people, their car becomes part of their ego, becomes part of their who they are as a person, their self-esteem, right? Again, we're targeted every day, and I'm finishing up, right about where I wanted to be, right at the 115 section. So again, I want you to go to your section in the book, see the activity for Unit 11, and complete that as your homework. Thank you so much for popping in and joining us for another lecture. I hope you guys are getting quite a bit out of this, because that was the intent for this course. You can let me know in your feedback. I'd like your feedback before the end of the semester, if you could, just so I can kind of get an idea of what you're receiving, what you want more of, what you want less of, because this class is a newer class within the system, and it's the first time we're teaching this class here. Not the first time I've taught this class, but the first time we're teaching it here. So I'm really hoping you guys are getting something out of it, and have a great week. See you next time. Bye-bye.